He built an empire on fear. She cleaned his floors in silence, but the night she grabbed his arm and whispered, "Don't go in there," he realized the only person protecting him had no power at all. Or so he thought. The rain hit Chicago like a grudge it had been holding for weeks. Jin Park stepped out of the black SUV at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. His driver held the umbrella. His bodyguard scanned the street. Neither of them spoke. Nobody ever spoke first around Jin. That was the rule. Not written, not posted, just understood. He was 38, Korean-born, Chicago-raised, owner of a shipping empire that stretched from the docks of Lake Michigan to the Gold Coast penthouses where politicians drank his whiskey and pretended they didn't know where it came from. The elevator ride to the 20th floor was silent. Jin loosened his tie. His shoulders ached. The meeting in Detroit had ended 2 days early, a rare gift. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home tonight. That decision would save his life. The penthouse was dark. Too dark. Usually, Ji Young left the hallway lights on, a habit she'd kept since their wedding 5 years ago. But tonight, the corridor stretched ahead of him like a throat, black and still. Jin reached for the light switch. A hand caught his wrist. He spun, instinct firing. His fist rose before his mind caught up. Then he saw her face. Keisha Johnson, his maid of 6 years, 41 years old, dark brown skin, tired eyes, and hands that had ironed every shirt he owned. She stood in front of him barefoot, wearing a plain gray dress, and her fingers were trembling around his wrist. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely made a sound. "Don't turn on the light." Jin's chest tightened. He had survived 3 assassination attempts. He had buried friends and enemies alike. But the fear in Keisha's eyes, that was something he had never seen before. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low. She shook her head. "Not here. Follow me." She led him through the dark hallway, past the grand staircase, past the family portraits Ji Young had chosen for appearance rather than memory. They moved quietly, 2 shadows in a house that suddenly felt hostile. Keisha stopped outside the study, Ji Young's private room, the one she always locked, the one Jin had never questioned because trust, to him, was not a word. It was architecture. You built your life on it. Keisha pressed a finger to her lips. Then she pointed at the door. Through the gap, Jin heard laughter, soft, intimate, not the kind shared between friends. He looked at Keisha. She nodded once. He pushed the door open, and the architecture of his life collapsed in 3 seconds. If you've ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it, stay with me. This story only gets darker. Subscribe now because what happens next, nobody sees it coming. Ji Young Park sat on the velvet chaise in the corner of the study, her legs crossed, her silk robe barely tied. She was holding a glass of red wine. Next to her, close enough to share breath, sat Marco Rivera. Marco, the man who ran the South Side crew, the man whose product Jin had burned 6 months ago, costing him $4 million in a single night, the man whose name alone could start a war. And he was sitting in Jin's house, in Jin's wife's study, with Jin's wife's hand resting on his thigh. Jin didn't move. He couldn't. The rage wasn't hot. It was cold, ice in his veins. His vision sharpened. Every detail registered at once. Marco's unbuttoned collar, Ji Young's freshly applied lipstick, the documents spread across the coffee table between them, blueprints, shipping routes, account numbers. His account numbers. Ji Young turned first. Her eyes found Jin standing in the doorway, and she didn't scream, she didn't apologize, she didn't even blink. She smiled. "You're early," she said, as if he had interrupted dinner, not treason. Marco stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. His hand moved toward his waistband, out of habit, not threat. He knew better to draw on Jin Park inside his own home, but his smirk said everything his gun couldn't. "Jin," Marco said, spreading his arms wide. "Your wife and I were just discussing business." Jin's fists clenched so hard his knuckles popped. He took one step forward. Keisha's hand grabbed his elbow from behind, firm, desperate. "Boss, not like this. Not tonight." Jin turned to her, his eyes wild. "I know what she's been doing," Keisha said, her voice steady even as her hand shook. "I've known for months, but if you act now, you lose everything. Your empire, your freedom, your life." Those words, your life, cut through the fog. Ji Young rose from the chaise. She walked toward Jin with the calm of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Before you do something reckless," she said, her voice silk over broken glass, "let me tell you something you don't know." She paused. The room held its breath. "This marriage was never real, Jin. It was an arrangement. Your father made it, my father approved it. And the terms," she tilted her head, the light catching the diamond at her throat, "the terms were that I would keep you distracted while the real work happened behind your back." Jin felt the floor shift beneath him. "Your shipping routes, your contacts, your political connections," Ji Young counted each item on her fingers like she was reading a grocery list. "Every single one was mapped and shared, not hackers, not traitors, by your wife." Silence. Marco chuckled. "She's been my partner longer than she's been your wife, Park. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Jin didn't answer. He looked at the blueprints on the table. He looked at Marco's smirk. He looked at Ji Young's cold, beautiful face. Then he looked at Keisha. The maid who cleaned his floors had just handed him the most valuable intelligence of his life. He straightened his tie, took a slow breath, and said the only thing that could save him in that moment. "Nothing. I'm going to do nothing tonight." Then he turned and walked out of the room. Behind him, Ji Young's smile faltered for the first time. She hadn't expected that. Jin didn't sleep that night. He sat in his private office on the East Wing, the one Ji Young didn't have a key to, and he stared at the wall. Not thinking, processing. There's a difference. At 4 a.m, Keisha knocked. She carried a mug of black coffee, no sugar, the way he always took it. She set it down on the desk without being asked. "Sit," Jin said. Keisha hesitated. In 6 years, he had never asked her to sit in his presence. She was the help. That was the arrangement. But tonight, arrangements were burning. She sat. "How long have you known?" Jin asked. 14 months. The number hit like a slap. 14. "I clean every room in this house, boss. I empty the trash cans, I wash the glasses, I hear the phone calls she forgets to end before I enter the room." Keisha looked down at her hands. "I found the first set of documents in the shredder. She didn't shred them small enough." Jin leaned back. "Why didn't you tell me?" This was the question that mattered. Keisha met his eyes, fully, openly, without the deference she usually wore like armor. "Because I was afraid. Not of you, of what you'd do and what would happen to me afterward." Jin stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I'm a black woman working in a Korean Mafia household. I have no family in this city, no lawyer, no protection. If I told you and you didn't believe me, or worse, if Ji Young found out first, I'd disappear and nobody would look for me." The honesty of it stunned him, not because it was harsh, because it was true. Jin set his coffee down. "Keisha, from this moment on, you are not my maid." She looked at him, confused. "You're the only person in this building I trust." The maid who scrubbed his floors just became the most important person in a mafia war. If loyalty like that moves you, subscribe, because what Keisha gets next will shock you. By morning, Jin Park was a different man. Not broken, rebuilt. The betrayal had stripped away the comfortable lies he'd been living inside, and what remained was something sharper. He made 3 calls before sunrise. The first was to Dae-ho Yoon, his consigliere, a 62-year-old Korean strategist who had served Jin's father before him. Daeho didn't deal in emotion, he dealt in outcomes. Jin told him everything. Daeho was silent for 11 seconds. Then he said, "We don't strike. We let them think they're winning." The second call was to his accountant. Jin wanted every financial trail Ji-young had access to, every wire transfer, every shell company, every signature she had forged. He wanted the paper trail wrapped in a bow. The third call surprised even Daeho. Jin called Keisha. "I need you to go back to your normal routine," Jin told her. "Clean the rooms, serve the meals, smile at Ji-young like nothing happened." Keisha was quiet. "You want me to pretend. You want me to survive. And I want you to watch everything she does, everyone she calls, every room she locks." That's espionage, boss. That's survival, Keisha, for both of us. She agreed. Over the next 48 hours, Keisha became the most valuable asset in Jin's organization, and nobody knew it but him. She intercepted a burner phone hidden inside a flower vase in Ji-young's bedroom. She photographed receipts for wire transfers to offshore accounts. She recorded a conversation between Ji-young and Marco through the wall of the laundry room. Marco's voice confirming the lakefront plan, Ji-young's voice cold and clinical, discussing Jin's death like it was a quarterly report. Keisha brought each piece of evidence to Jin under the guise of delivering late-night coffee. Each time, she trembled. Each time, she stayed. On the second night, Jin looked at her and said something unexpected. "You should leave. I can get you out of the city tonight. New identity, new life." Keisha headed him. "Why not?" She looked at him, really looked at him, the way no one in his organization ever dared. "Because nobody in my life has ever trusted me with something this important, and I don't walk away from people who trust me." Jin didn't respond, but something shifted in the space between them. Not romance, not yet. Something harder to name. Recognition. Two people from different worlds seeing each other clearly for the first time. She could have run. She had every reason to. But she stayed, and that decision changed everything. If you're watching and you haven't subscribed yet, tell me in the comments, what's stopping you? Friday arrived like a held breath finally released. Jin followed Ji-young's plan to the letter, or rather, he followed the version of the plan he didn't know about. He told her he had a meeting at the lakefront warehouse that evening, a routine inspection of a shipment. She smiled and kissed his cheek. "Be safe," she said. The words tasted like poison. At 6 o'clock, Jin's convoy left the penthouse. 3 black SUVs, bulletproof glass, armed guards. To anyone watching, it looked like business as usual. But Jin wasn't in any of those cars. He was sitting in the back of a delivery van 2 blocks away, wearing a gray jacket and a baseball cap with Keisha beside him, and Daeho on speakerphone. Marco has 12 men at the warehouse, armed, positioned for an ambush. Ji-young's car is parked 3 blocks south. She's waiting for confirmation. Jin nodded. "Let them take the warehouse." "Boss." I said, let them take it. When Marco's men move in and find it empty, his confidence will crack. A confident enemy is predictable. A confused enemy makes mistakes. At 6:30, Marco's crew stormed the lakefront warehouse. They found crates of imported furniture. Nothing else. Marco called Ji-young. Jin listened through the tapped phone, Keisha holding the recording device steady. "He's not here," Marco hissed. "Where is he?" Ji-young's voice trembled for the first time. "He should be there. I watched them leave." Then someone warned him. Silence on the line. "Find out who," Marco said, "and handle it." Jin looked at Keisha. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "They'll suspect the staff." "I know." "They'll suspect me." "I know that too." "So what do we do?" Jin reached into his jacket and placed a small black phone on the seat between them. A burner. Untraceable. "From now on, you report only to me. You eat where I eat, you sleep where I sleep." Keisha stared at him. "People will talk. Let them." She picked up the phone. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. The next 72 hours compressed Jin's world to the size of a safe house, a modest apartment in Pilsen that belonged to no one on any record. 4 rooms, 1 exit, two people who had never spent this much time together outside the walls of the penthouse. Jin worked from a folding table, laptops, burner phones, spreadsheets printed on cheap paper. He dismantled his wife's betrayal layer by layer, tracing every dollar she had funneled, every document she had forged, every alliance she had sold. Keisha cooked, not because he asked, because she needed something to do with her hands when the fear got too loud. She made jell-off rice one night, the spice filling the tiny kitchen. Jin ate 2 plates without saying a word. On the second night, he found her sitting on the kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, her back against the cabinet, staring at nothing. He sat down beside her. "You're scared." "I've been scared since the night I warned you." "Then why are you here?" She turned to look at him. Close. Closer than either of them had ever been. "Because I spent 6 years watching you run an empire and never once saw you be cruel to someone who didn't deserve it. You're terrifying, Jin Park, but you're not evil. And in my life, that distinction matters more than you know." Jin felt something crack open in his chest. Not pain, not anger, something older, something he'd buried under years of transactions and power plays. The feeling of being known by someone who had no reason to lie. He didn't reach for her, she didn't reach for him, but the distance between them shrank in a way that had nothing to do with inches. "Keisha," he said quietly, "when this is over, I'm going to owe you more than I can ever repay." She almost smiled. "I don't keep tabs, boss." "Stop calling me that. What should I call you?" He paused. "Jin. Just Jin." She looked at him for a long time. "Okay. Jin." And there it was. A name spoken without fear, without deference, without calculation. Just a name between two people who were choosing to trust each other in the middle of a war. It was the most dangerous thing either of them had done. Ji Young was unraveling. She couldn't reach Jin. His phone went to voicemail. His men gave her nothing. They'd been instructed to treat her normally, but share nothing about Jin's movements. She was still in the penthouse, still playing the role of the Mafia wife, but the stage was shifting beneath her. Marco grew impatient. He called twice a day, then 3 times. His voice carried more threat than reassurance. "You told me this would be clean," Marco snapped during one call. Keisha's recording picked up every syllable. "I did have him controlled," Ji Young shot back. "Someone tipped him off." "Then we accelerate. I'm sending men to search every property he owns." "And if he fights back?" Marco laughed. "He won't. Without his shipping routes, his political contacts, and his accounts, which we already drained, Jin Park is a name without a kingdom." But Marco was wrong about one thing. Jin had already moved his real assets. 48 hours before the ambush, Daeho had quietly transferred controlling interest in 3 shell companies to new entities. The accounts Ji Young had drained were decoys, bait accounts Jin had set up the morning after the confrontation, seeded with just enough money to look real. Marco had stolen a fortune that didn't exist. Meanwhile, Jin prepared the final move. He compiled every piece of evidence Keisha had gathered, the recordings, the photographs, the financial documents, the handwritten assassination timeline, and sent it to 3 places simultaneously. The first package went to the FBI's Organized Crime Division. The second went to a journalist at the Chicago Tribune who had been chasing the Rivera cartel for years. The third went to the heads of 5 Korean-American business families who had invested in Jin's shipping network. These were men who valued loyalty above everything, men who would view Ji Young's betrayal as an attack on the entire community. Jin didn't need to pull a trigger. He built a cage and let his enemies walk into it. He turned his wife's betrayal into a weapon without firing a single shot. Stories like this remind us that real power isn't violence, it's patience. Subscribe because the fallout is about to shake everyone. It happened on a Wednesday. At 9 in the morning, FBI agents knocked on the door of Marco Rivera's South Side headquarters. By noon, his accounts were frozen. By 3 o'clock, 6 of his lieutenants were in custody, each one trying to cut a deal before the others. Marco ran. He made it as far as Milwaukee before a state trooper recognized his plates from the alert Daeho had anonymously filed. That same morning, the Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story with the headline, Korean Mafia Wife Implicated in Assassination Plot Against Husband. The article didn't name Keisha, it didn't name the source, but it named Ji-young, her aliases, her offshore accounts, her meetings with Marco, everything. Ji-young found out when her hairdresser called to cancel her appointment. By evening, she was sitting in the penthouse surrounded by packed suitcases and no allies. The women who used to invite her to charity lunches had blocked her number. The society pages that once featured her portrait were now running her mugshot next to the story. She called Jin. He answered. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in their entire marriage. Jin stood at the window of the safe house, looking out at the city she'd tried to hand to his enemies. "You planned to kill me, Ji-young. You sold my empire to a man who wanted me dead, and you're asking how I could do this to you? We had an arrangement." "You had an arrangement. I had a marriage. There's a difference." Silence. "Who told you?" Ji-young asked. "Who warned you?" Jin looked across the room. Keisha was standing by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching him. She had dark circles under her eyes, but iron in her posture. "The only person in that house who treated me like a human being," Jin said. He hung up. Ji-young was arrested 2 days later. The charges included conspiracy, fraud, and solicitation of murder. She didn't make bail. The judge cited flight risk and extensive international financial connections. In the holding room, when her lawyer asked if she had anything to say, Ji-young stared at the wall and said, "I underestimated the Maid." 6 months passed. Jin rebuilt, not the same empire, a different one, cleaner. The shipping routes were restructured with legitimate oversight. The political connections were replaced with community partnerships. Daeho retired, satisfied that the organization would survive without the shadows it had lived in for decades. Jin sold the penthouse. He moved to a brownstone in Lincoln Park. No marble lobby, no grand staircase, no hallway of portraits chosen for appearance, just rooms with sunlight and shelves with books he actually wanted to read. Keisha didn't go back to cleaning houses. Jin funded her enrollment at DePaul University, not as charity, but as repayment for what she had given him. "You saved my life," he told her. "The least I can do is invest in yours." She studied social work. She wanted to build something for women in situations like the one she'd been trapped in, invisible, undervalued, afraid to speak up because the cost of truth was too high. They saw each other, often. Coffee at the brownstone became dinner. Dinner became long walks along the lakefront where Marco had planned to kill him. They talked about things neither of them had ever told anyone. Jin told her about his mother, who died when he was 12, who used to sing Korean folk songs while hanging laundry. Keisha told him about growing up in Memphis, about her grandmother who raised her on scripture and stubbornness, about the husband who left when money got tight and never came back. They didn't rush. There was no contract, no arrangement, no transaction. One evening, standing on the shore of Lake Michigan while the city glowed behind them, Keisha said, "People are going to talk about us. A Korean mafia boss and her former maid. They'll say I'm with you for the money. They'll say you're with me because I'm convenient." Jin turned to her. "People have been saying things about me my whole life. None of it ever changed who I am." "And who are you?" He looked at the water, then back at her. "Someone who spent 38 years thinking power meant control. And then a woman in a gray dress said to stay quiet in my own hallway, and I realized power is knowing who to listen to." Keisha didn't say anything for a long time. Then she reached out and took his hand. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, out of choice. And Jin held on like it was the first honest thing he'd touched in years. Real love doesn't come with a contract. It comes when someone sees you at your worst and still chooses to stay. If this story made you feel something, subscribe. The next one goes even deeper. 2 years later, Jin Park stood at the opening ceremony of the Keisha Johnson Community Center, a 3-story building on the south side of Chicago dedicated to workforce training, legal aid, and counseling for women leaving dangerous situations. Keisha designed the program herself, Every detail reflected what she had learned, not just in classrooms, but in the penthouse hallways where she was invisible, in the safe house kitchen where she was afraid, in the moments where speaking up could have cost her life, but staying silent would have cost someone else's theirs. Jin funded the building. He stood in the crowd, not on the stage. This was her moment. When Keisha took the microphone, she didn't give a speech about overcoming. She told the truth. 2 years ago, I was a maid. I earned less in a month than some people spend on a single dinner. I cleaned floors, washed dishes, and kept my mouth shut because that's what survival looked like. And then, one night, I had a choice. I could stay quiet and stay safe, or I could tell the truth and risk everything. She paused. I chose the truth because I wasn't brave, because I was tired of being afraid. The room was silent.